Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's just about 7 o'clock. So we're going to ask everyone to stay on mute, and we're glad you're here. For those of you I don't know, my name is Phyllis Tierman, and I'm one of the leadership team members from Sustainable Wellesley. Sustainable Wellesley is an all-volunteer, we're a nonprofit organization that engages residents, businesses, and the town of Wellesley to take sustainable actions to protect our climate, reduce pollution of air, land, and water, preserve biodiversity, minimize waste, and ensure environmental justice. We are glad you're here tonight. We are co-sponsoring this event with the town of Wellesley's Climate Action Committee. I'm not sure if Mary Beth is on yet, but if she isn't, we'll have her speak towards the end. This is a very timely event because the town of Wellesley just launched its climate action plan, which will help us meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So if you're in Wellesley, you should definitely check out the town of Wellesley's climate action plan and learn more about what you can do. But partially why you're here is for that reason, is that you'll help meet our town goals. But really tonight is all about healthy and high performing homes. And we have three incredible local speakers that I feel very grateful that have taken time to share with us tonight about this exciting topic. We have Rachel White from Byggmeister. We have Stephanie Horowitz from ZeroEnergy Design, and Nick Falkoff is from Auburndale Builders. I guess for this evening, we're just going to ask that you stay on mute, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of great questions, and we encourage you to put them in the chat. We will maybe take one or two between each speaker, but we'll probably hold most of them till the very end. And I guess let's get going. Did I miss anything? I think that's it. Rachel, do you want to get going?
Yeah, thanks so much, Phyllis. And let me get my presentation going. All right, it's nice to see everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you Sustainable Wellesley and the Wellesley Climate Action Committee for inviting me and Nick and Stephanie to speak to you all tonight. Before we get started, I'll just give you a high-level overview of what you can expect from our program. Nick and Stephanie and I are each going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'd like to set aside the time at the end for an extended, or however long we go, Q&A and discussion session. One way to think about the presentations that you're about to hear as three different answers, three different but complementary answers to a single question, which is, what role do homes and homeowners play, or should they play, can they play, in helping Wellesley meet its climate action goals? Housing is responsible for 39% of Wellesley's carbon emissions. That's more than all the other building type emissions combined. It's more than transportation. And so in order to meet your emissions reduction goals of cutting emissions in half by 2030, 3/4 by 2040, and net zero by 2050, you're going to have to address housing. And so I'm going to start off speaking about home renovations and retrofits as climate solutions. Byggmeister Design Build is a renovation and retrofit remodeling firm. Well, I said three things the same way. So we're a remodeling firm. We're striving to serve as exemplary stewards of existing homes. We focus on preserving and adapting homes and helping them to meet the needs of the 21st century. After I speak, I'll turn it over to Stephanie, who's a principal at ZeroEnergy Design, and will provide recommendations, advice, guidance for when you are designing and building a new house. And then finally, we're going to conclude with Nick, who will share some strategies, tips, and tools to help all of you and all of us here become more effective advocates for policies and practices that will move Wellesley and our entire region and state forward. So, all right, starting with existing homes. There are three Simple in theory, perhaps complex in practice steps to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to decarbonize your house. The first is to reduce your energy loads. The average home in New England, single family home in New England, uses 125 million BTUs per year. If you're not familiar with a BTU, a British thermal unit, it's sort of a common energy metric that we convert, therms, kilowatt hours, gallons of oil, propane to kind of create a single metric. The average home in New England uses 125 million BTUs. 60% of that goes towards heating. So when you're thinking about where to focus first and reducing your energy usage and cutting the carbon emissions of your house, you want to focus on air sealing and insulating in order to drive that heating load down. That's not to say that efficiency of your appliances, your lighting, your electronics, your cooling, that doesn't matter. But in terms of prioritization and the biggest dial that you can turn, focusing on reducing your heating energy use is where you want to start. Next step after that is to electrify. That means changing out every fossil fuel system in your home for an electric-based system. So heat pumps for heating as well as cooling, electric water heating. Byggmeister, our go-to, I imagine it's true for Nick, is typically a heat pump water heater. Induction cooking. If you have a gas dryer, obviously switching that out for electric as well. And then last but not least is solar. I understand your program in Wellesley, I think is called We Care. I hope I got that right. I looked it up. And so enrolling into 100% renewable energy is something that everybody can do, regardless of whether they have a good solar aperture to install solar panels on their house. So those are the three steps. Now, just a word about sequencing. The first two really do go hand in hand in the sense that before you, particularly when you're talking about changing over to heat pumps for heating, you really want to drive down those heating loads first. Because you want to make sure that you're putting in equipment that is going to work efficiently. And so you want to avoid putting in greater capacity and using greater energy than you need to. So those really do go hand in hand, whereas the solar is something that it's not quite as critical. That doesn't necessarily need to happen in a sequence, particularly if you're signing up for enrolling in renewable energy through the municipal light plant. So I'd like to move on now to share a couple of case studies, 3 case studies that give you some sense of what this decarbonization roadmap might look like in practice. I'm going to start with a project that we did in Newton, a whole house retrofit in 2018. This project was most of our projects, and the other 2 that I'll share after this, combine renovation work, so design, space planning, reconfiguration with energy and performance work. But this is a project we call sort of a performance only project that focused just on improving the energy and carbon performance of the home. So these clients came to us with the goal of reducing their energy use and carbon emissions as much as they could within sort of reasonable, I would say, budgetary constraints. So they didn't want to thicken the wall assemblies and add insulation. Their house really wasn't a great candidate for that, but for budgetary reasons as well, to add insulation to the outside. So working within the existing framing of the house to do as much as they could to improve it and to drive down carbon emissions. One of the owners is a energy policy analyst and wanted to walk the talk. So I guess I'd say, fortunately, there was a lot to be done with this house. So there was a lot of improvement that could be made. The walls were uninsulated. There was no insulation in the basement. There was sort of modest levels of insulation along the attic floor. A relatively old gas system, so it was nearing the end of its useful life and was sort of time to think about changing it out anyway, which is often one thing I'll say is you want to plan for that in advance of when your equipment dies, so that you're not, you don't end up installing, another gas system just because you're in an emergency situation. So it's good to plan that in advance. So what we did at this house is we insulated comprehensively insulated it within the framing cavities. We insulated the underside of the roof, the walls, the garage ceiling, air sealing around the band joists in the basement. And then the new mechanicals were a combination of a ducted and ductless heat pump system. So ducted on the in the attic to serve the second floor bedrooms, and ductless on the first floor with a heat pump water heater. And then last but not least, they installed a 10.5 kW solar, which is producing about 84% of the energy they're using now on an annual basis. To give you a sense of the impact of this work, it's pretty dramatic. This is on the upper end of what we see with this kind of work. They went from, again, that number of the average house in New England uses 125 million BTUs a year. They started off higher than that, got dramatically lower than that, 69% savings, and similarly significant savings on their operating carbon emissions. The next case study I'd like to share is one of those sort of the sweet spot for us, a combination of functional improvements, livability improvements, as well as energy performance upgrades. So this house, this project, interestingly, the owners came to us really, it was primarily about making the house, oh, my slides are not advancing. Oh, now I've gone too far. It was really about making the house livable for them. This house had been in one of the owner's families since it was built in, I believe it was 1930. So it was the owner's grandfather's house. His mother grew up there. He and his wife inherited it. And really very little work had been done to it since they moved in when they inherited, he inherited it from his grandfather. And so really it was their sort of top priorities were making the house livable, functional, and suitable for their daily lifestyle needs. So the kitchen was awkward and chopped up. There was this very public tiny bathroom plunked into I called it the quarterback, plunked into the corner of the kitchen. You can't see in this picture here, but they have a really deep backyard, just with a beautiful kind of private backyard that they, were sort of cut off from, had limited access to. And so it was primarily about making their lives better, making this house work better for them. And what we were able to bring to the equation was to really bring to them and incorporate into the project some significant energy upgrades as well. So not only had the kitchen and the interior spaces not been touched for a long time, but the systems were really old, and similar to the last project, this house had very little insulation. There was some along the attic floor, but none in the walls. The basement, about 1/3 of those basement walls are above ground because the house is on a hill, so that was completely uninsulated as well. Really old equipment, in fact, so old that our plumber took a picture of the hot water heater, which was pretty unusual. That doesn't usually happen, that plumbers are surprised by equipment. And so we had a lot to work with, and amenable clients who were happy to put themselves in our hands to help them become more comfortable. Top priority was to give them a bright, airy, open kitchen that connected to the rest of the house, the backyard, and just it really worked for their daily needs. We also we took over the back third of the living room, front to back living room, to create a first floor bathroom that would be accessible for their aging parents when they came to visit, and provide overflow use for their family. Before this, they were a family of 4 with 1.5 bathrooms. And then this beautiful large back deck with the room for seating area as well as dining. And then the energy measures. So similar to the last project, we comprehensively insulated the entire shell. eliminated the gas, went over to heat pumps for heating and cooling, as well as for heat pump water heater, changed over the cooking to induction. Actually, the last remaining gas appliance in the house is the gas dryer, which was fairly new. So they still have a small gas bill every month. But the end result of this work was even more dramatic. And I do want to emphasize, you'll see when I do the next case study, that this is not what we see on every project. This is like the homes that need a lot. What I guess the message here is there are a lot of homes out there that really do need a lot, that really have not yet been insulated. Their equipment is really old. And when you encounter those homes, if you have one of those homes, it is possible to achieve really deep energy savings and really deep decarbonization. And that's without, what we would think of as super insulating or doing a deep energy retrofit, where you're adding insulation to the outside of the walls and on top of the roof. I included this graph here on the right just to show you. This is an example of some of the data we put together when we're looking at and the graphs we put together for our clients to show the impact of the work that we've done, just to see the really dramatic savings in the winter months. And goes back to my point about how, just to emphasize the point about how the vast majority of the energy use in a home in our climate, I think it was roughly 60% of the average home energy use goes to heating. And you see here how dramatically we're able to drive that down. You can see the dramatic drops in energy use in the colder months of the year by this combination of comprehensively insulating the building shell and then changing out really old, very inefficient equipment for sort of best in class heat pumps. All right, final project. Now you'll get to see what more sort of modest or moderate improvements look like, which is really more typical for our projects than these really dramatic savings that we're able to achieve. More often than not, maybe not more often than not, but we are very often when you're working with existing homes, they can push back hard against your efforts to achieve deep levels of decarbonization. If you don't have access, easy access to the exterior surfaces to insulate them, let's say the house is a brick house and insulating the walls would require, dense packing cellulose from the inside, which is really messy and invasive, and you kind of need to move out of your entire house. So you can run into situations like that all the time with existing homes where it's just really hard. And this was one of those cases. This project, all of our projects are always interesting. This was another really interesting family. Three generations are living in this home. The owners of the house have 3 school-age children, and one of their parents live with them. So the owners have their bedroom up on the 3rd floor, their bedroom and bath, and the 2nd floor sort of primary bedroom suite. They have their parents in, and then their 3 kids. I believe they have 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. So they all have their sleeping quarters all work for them for the 7-person family. What didn't work was their 1st floor. A really long, narrow kitchen. The grandfather does a lot of Chinese style wok cooking, and there's no ventilation. He was cooking outside all year long on the back patio. And so that was a top priority, was getting him to be able to cook inside. And the comings and goings of a family of 7 just, was really tight, a lot of pinch points that we had to address. They also had spoken with Mass Save. They had a Mass Save assessment that said the message was, there's not much that we can do for you. I don't know if that was followed by, here are some light bulbs, but that's what we often hear. People say they call Mass Save and say, there's not much you can do, but here are some light bulbs. So in any event, they really wanted to see if there were things that they could do to reduce energy and carbon as part of this project. As Mass Save found, the walls were mostly insulated. So there was, again, not much work that could be done to improve the walls. The basement was partly finished, and so including at the ceiling level, and so the band joist area, which is a high leverage point for air sealing, was not accessible. And then similarly at the top of the house, the attic, the third floor is finished. Those slopes have fiberglass in them. They're spotty at points, but it's finished, and there's fiberglass as well on the attic floor. They had really limited appetite they lived in the house during the project. They needed to maintain their living and sleeping space on the third floor. And so insulating up there, taking the finishes down in order to insulate properly was not it was not in the cards, and they nor was doing a whole house conversion to heat pumps. They had a gas boiler and hot water heater and central air for the second and third floor. What we were able to accomplish, as you see on this slide, is obviously all the walls that we opened up, we insulated well. That was about a third of the first floor area. We insulated well, and then we incorporated heat pumps into the first floor. So we took the first floor off of the gas boiler, and we put in heat pumps for heating and cooling on the first floor. They've retained the gas boiler and central air, and with the idea that when the time comes to change one or both of those out, that they'll then complete the conversion to heat pumps and also change the water heater at the same time. We did stay, you can see in this top photo, these were taken right during punch list. We did retain a gas range. We've been pushing our clients pretty hard on cooking, and I'd say we're successful 2/3 of the time. I mean, a lot of people come to us and they want induction cooking, so we don't have to sell them on it, but some people really do not want it. And this was one of those cases. They were convinced that their style of cooking was not compatible with induction cooking. And so when that happens, we say, okay, we're the recommenders, you're the deciders. But that seems to be the sticking point for electrification more than, I would say, heat pumps. More modest savings on this house, but still significant. 21% savings on annual energy use, 16% on carbon. Not surprisingly, another bar chart to show that the electric use increased at this house because we did a partial conversion to heat pumps, and the gas went down. Just some different ways that we look at this data. All right, this is my last slide, and then I will turn it over to Stephanie. These are the three things that I'd like to leave you with. The first is that most home renovations and home improvement projects present at least some opportunities to improve performance. They may not be dramatic, but there are often some, or more often than not, I would say there are some. And in many cases, deep decarbonization is possible. And I think deeper decarbonization than many people think is possible with the types of measures that we're doing. And then the last thing I'll say is that you really do need to plan ahead. I mentioned earlier, like the example of if you haven't planned for your heating system replacement, and then your gas boiler or gas furnace dies in the middle of winter, you're going to go back with exactly what you have because you're going to want to get it in as soon as possible so you don't freeze. But if you plan ahead, then you have the time, you've know what you're going to do when your heating system dies, and you have a plan to make that happen. So plan ahead, because if you miss an opportunity like a heating system, like your next heating system, then it's going to be a couple of decades before it makes sense to consider that again. So I will.
Thank you, Rachel.
Stop there, and I don't know if you want to go on or if you want to.
I'll give Stephanie a chance to get ready. Thank you. That was really good. I'm just going to throw one question at you,
Okay.
Rachel, and then we can do the rest later. Windows. Someone has a question about windows, doors. garages or outside outlets, level 2 chargers. That's a lot.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to talk about windows and doors. I should have talked about windows and doors, and I guess I didn't, because
Only in 20 minutes.
I know, only in 20 minutes. So here's the thing: if in those projects where we were putting in new windows, we went with as part of the renovation work, we go with triple pane wherever we can. But when we're not changing out windows, we don't, so for example, that house in Jamaica Plain, that house has single pane windows with storms. And our perspective on that is, if you're not going to go up to triple pane, then there's no point really in changing to double glazed. Make sure your storms work, your windows can close. You consider changing out, single pane windows to double glazed if you have, functional problems with your windows. I don't know if Stephanie or Nick have different. Well, Stephanie, you don't do this kind of work, but anyway, that's my short answer to that question. Probably not too short, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, you're ready to show your slides?
Yes. Are you guys seeing the?
Perfect. It looks great.
Okay, awesome.
Wait, you know what? In the middle is there you go. Perfect.
And is the top.
Mm,
Yeah, right where your cursor is.
is that better?
Yep, it's done.
All right, as long as I can advance, I think we'll be good. All right, so hopefully they'll be a bit of repetition here as I send a very similar message as Rachel has. So good evening, my name is Stephanie Horowitz. I'm an architect and owner at ZeroEnergy Design, or ZED. We're focused on high performance residential buildings ranging from single family custom homes to multifamily buildings. And our mission is to create beautiful, healthy buildings to empower families, uplift communities, and improve our living world. We operate at the intersection of energy and architecture, and my business partner, Jordan Goldman, does all of our in-house energy modeling and mechanical design on our 1 and 2 family projects, allowing us to take a calculated approach. So we're focused on designing beautiful, livable spaces that are also thermally comfortable, have great indoor air quality, are long-lasting, durable structures that use less energy, and at the residential scale, ideally produce more energy than they use. So where does our energy go? Rachel had, I think, cited some of these statistics. We may have been looking at different years, but the greenhouse gas emissions in Wellesley, homes are a large part of the problem and also part of the solution looking forward. So Rachel talked about the heating demand of a home. So if we look at New England energy consumption, the majority of it is going to space heating. And so where is this heat going? It's going literally through cracks in whether it be a new home or an existing one, like Rachel was talking about. And we're losing heat through our walls and roofs, the opaque surfaces, through our windows, and even through the ground, through our foundations and basements. So we're really looking to change the conversation about design. It's not just about what our homes look and feel like, but it's also how they perform and the impact that they have on the environment. So on our website, for example, we disclose energy use intensity, or EUI, of our projects. EUI expresses a building's energy use as a function of its size. And it's calculated by dividing the total energy consumed by the building in 1 year, measured in kBTUs, by the total floor area, which is measured in square feet. So if it's 0, that might be a net zero building or a net zero home. It's producing as much energy as it uses. And if it's negative, it means that it's net positive. It's producing more energy than it uses. And that's really important when we start to think about charging electric vehicles. So, Rachel covered the real challenge, the renovations. Each one is unique, and they can be complicated, but new construction is the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do these things right from the start when you have a blank slate. But as a homeowner, it's imperative to ask for something different. We've been building homes the same way for almost 200 years, and it's time to ask for something different. The good news is that the methods are tried and true, and the materials and the systems that Rachel has talked about, that I'm going to talk about, are readily available, or at least they were before the recent supply chain disruptions. But, so what might this look like? There are all different ways to ask, and even more ways to get there. But the Wellesley guidelines, I think, use net zero emissions. Net positive energy, is a great place to start. Again, at the scale of a home, we can reduce the loads down in a house so that we can install a rooftop solar array and allow the house to overproduce, which is really important as electric vehicles or EVs become more and more common. Super insulated and airtight, and of course, all electric. We're looking to take fossil fuels out of our homes, especially in new construction. And as the electricity grid is decarbonized and gets greener and greener, we have a really great system that's working together. Now you can either assemble a design and construction team with experience in this way of designing and building, or you can ask your trusted team to do something different. And again, the information is readily available for anyone who is willing and interested. And the more building and design professionals who learn to do this, the better. So this approach really kind of follows what Rachel was talking about. We start with the design, and then we follow the path to zero. First, we prioritize the building enclosure, making them airtight and well insulated. Then we design all electric, right size systems for heating, cooling, ventilation, and domestic hot water. And finally, where feasible, we add solar panels to the roof to offset energy consumption. And the more we oversize the systems where feasible, it allows us to offset transportation energy, and that's why we call it net positive. So I'm going to walk through what this might look like using 2 different case studies, but here are the strategies that we like. Start with design, employ continuous air barrier, continuous insulation. We like to prioritize materials, specifically insulation with low global warming potential, or GWP. We like triple glazed windows in new construction, air source heat pumps, continuous ventilation with energy recovery, and renewables. So this is sort of the playbook, and it really works on almost all of the new construction projects that we work on. So here's a project in Wellesley that we worked on a couple of years ago. We started with a design that responded to the site conditions. The back of the property, so the rear faces south. And you'll see that that's where we've created a nice clean kind of roof surface for the solar panels, which you can't see from the front of the property. And we've arranged the living spaces to really take advantage of the views to the backyard, as well as to that warm, southern sun that kind of comes in the rear windows throughout the day. So you can see in the photos, we have the kitchen and dining area really opening up to the south-facing backyard. And we have more, modest glazing on the east and west sides of the house. So below here, you're seeing the kitchen wall, which really doesn't need any windows, and then windows kind of consolidated here in the living space, and a lot of borrowed light that's coming in through the south-facing windows. We've also looked to right size the home so that it meets the needs of the homeowner. So starting with these kind of enclosure measures, continuous air barrier. Hopefully this is something that looks familiar. The air barrier, it's monolithically applied, saves energy, improves comfort by eliminating drafts, improves durability by eliminating air and moisture transport through the assemblies. This sheathing plus weather barrier, it should look familiar. It's locally available, and it's really effective at creating an airtight enclosure. After we address the air leakage, we really want to give the home a winter coat. So, like all good New Englanders, we wrap the house, the wood structure, in continuous insulation, and it's really effective at really cutting down heat loss through the walls, through the roof, and even through the foundation. And so you're seeing that sort of green zip sheathing get covered up with insulation, and eventually the siding will get applied on top of that. When we look at the materials, materials matter. We look to specify non-toxic, low embodied carbon materials. We like to use a lot of cellulose in walls, in roofs, and we use insulation that is, again, readily available. Sometimes we do use products that are currently being imported, but are looking forward to being able to source them locally in the future. Triple glazed windows, I think this was a question that had come up earlier. We use them pretty exclusively in new construction, and even in some of our renovation projects. But they're really much more comfortable to be able to sit in front of them and not feel cold and drafty in the winter. Again, Rachel talked about air source heat pumps. It's kind of like an air conditioner that works in two directions. They're rated for very low temperatures, and so we don't have a problem using them in this climate as a primary heat source. And they're really well sized for the very low heating load that we have in the homes that we design. Once we make the structure airtight, it's important to provide continuous ventilation. The system called an energy recovery ventilator, or an ERV, supplies fresh air to the living space and exhausts it from sources of contamination like kitchens and bathrooms. And the ERV exchanges heat and moisture between the incoming and outgoing air streams. So finally, we've really reduced the load of the home. We've reduced the heating and cooling energy. Hopefully we have an efficient user, we have efficient systems, we have Energy Star appliances, induction cooking, and that allows us to offset a lot of the home's energy use with a rooftop solar array. And some really simple planning can create a great south-facing roof surface that is uninterrupted by, plumbing vents and other things that can get in the way in an existing home. This is another project in Lincoln that I'll run through a bit more quickly. But again, a lot of the same. So site responsive design, in this case, the front of the house faces south, and they had the flexibility to push the home a little bit farther away from the street to create a nice green space that they wanted to look out onto. And so we located the kitchen, dining, and living spaces on the south side to really take advantage of that generously glazed, warm, kind of southern facade of the home. And we've located programs that maybe don't need as much light, don't really benefit from as many windows on the northern side of the home, while still creating a connection to the backyard. So again, we're starting the process by thinking about design and really right-sizing the house for the homeowner's needs. Here, kind of showing some of the specs that we're using, and a technical drawing that's cutting through the assembly, quite similar to the one that I just showed in Wellesley, with some of the performance values here. And again, a really similar approach to the enclosure and the systems. Here we are using a different type of weather and air barrier over the sheathing that gets installed over plywood, as opposed to the sort of 2-in-1 product. But again, using that same continuous insulation, and then focusing on the systems, the air source heat pumps for heating and cooling. As Rachel mentioned, we use a lot of heat pump hot water heaters for domestic hot water. And again, the energy recovery ventilator to provide continuous ventilation to the home, whether or not the windows are open or closed. It's a really low energy use system that is a great fit for a super insulated home. This one has a 13.1 kW array. Again, we thought about that when we designed the roof form. We put all of the plumbing vents on the rear of the home so that they didn't interrupt the solar array. And we test the house throughout construction, as well as at the end, to help ensure success, to make sure that we're hitting our airtightness goals. So this project is extremely airtight relative to what the code requires. And it just helps ensure that the home kind of works as designed. So the results on this project, to share a little bit of data: 10,900 kilowatt hours total consumption, 16,200 kilowatt hours total production, and that results in a net positive home. It's the equivalent to about 20,000 miles on an electric car, depending on how efficient your car is. So, again, the message is that this approach is achievable now. Each home that's built is either part of the problem or part of the solution. So please ask, really demand something different. Net zero, net positive, they're all really great targets that are implementable and achievable now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I like that slogan, follow the path to zero. We have so many questions. I think I'm just going to wait. So I'm just going to tell Nick he can start his slides if he's ready.
Okay, let me get this up. Okay, share screen. Let me know if you can see this. Share. Oh, sorry. Slideshow. Nope.
Don't
Sorry.
see it yet.
You can't see it yet? 1 second.
No worries.
Can you see the slideshow now?
Yep, and your talking stuff.
Okay. My
There you
talking.
go. Perfection.
Okay. I'm Nick Falkoff. I'm the owner of Auburndale Builders and co-founder of the Studio for High Performance Design and Construction. And I work with Stephanie and I do a lot of presentations with Rachel. And so thanks for inviting me to this. Tonight, I'm going to actually recycle a previous presentation that was crafted and presented by Dan Rubin at the Passive House, Massachusetts Symposium in 2019. So thank you, Dan, for allowing me to recycle your slides. I've made some minor modifications. Okay, so this presentation was called the Accelerating the Transition to Passive House, the Newton Mass Experience. And Dan is the chair of Green Newton Building Standards Committee. So introduction, so Green Newton influenced 2 developers to commit to Passive House certification for large projects. And they advocated for green building provisions in Newton's special permitting process. In this presentation, I'm going to go over Green Newton's strategies and lessons learned. And I worked a lot with Dan and working to hosting city councilors at our studio. So I want to present this as a model for what Sustainable Wellesley might think about for advocating, not just in single family, but also in residential, big multifamily developments, school buildings, municipalities. Like, let's think outside the box. And this was really done on a local level very effectively. And Green Newton was a big part of this. So Green Newton was founded in 1990. There's 400 plus members, 1,600 on a weekly e-newsletter. I think that might be up over 2,000 or 3,000 now. It's mostly educational mission until recently, and now it's becoming more political, advocating for high performance development. So some Newton background, there's a big contentious issue in Newton. There's a lot of big developments being proposed back in 2019. There was a lot of pressure to alleviate housing shortage, and there's willing developers who want to develop and they want to increase the tax base. But there was a lot of opposition from people who wanted to what they call right-size Newton, pushing back against the traffic and the noise, or potentially lower housing values, or the concern about attracting the wrong type of people. So I'm not sure how much development is proposed in Wellesley, but I'm going to go through some of the standards and then how this was approached. So Green Newton Building Standards Committee, which I was not on, but I do consult with them and I give a lot of feedback. That was launched in 2018, 10 members, mostly building and planning professionals. They work to determine the green principles, a lot of what Stephanie went through and what Rachel went through. They looked to influence the Newton developers and how to use these green principles. And they looked to influence the Newton government to require these principles when people want to do something that's not by right. So when we can't change the building codes in our towns legally, but as soon as something is a special permit or something needs to go through a community review, all of a sudden there's an opening for community to pressure people to build lower carbon buildings. And this is, I'm not sure what the opportunities are in Wellesley. I'm not sure there's gonna be time to cover Article 38, but this was all done without changing any building codes. Okay, so the green building principles are: number 1, encouraging passive house. Number 2, encouraging low carbon, embodied carbon. So like Stephanie showed, using materials that are carbon storage, not carbon emitters. So when you see a steel mill and it's a blasting gas furnace, steel is high carbon. Using wood is good. Wood stores carbon. We can store carbon from our atmosphere in our wood buildings. And then it looked at using electric heating and cooling and cooking, and electric heating for hot water where feasible. Okay, so basically those heat pumps that Stephanie showed you and Rachel showed you. And then looking to minimize carbon for transportation. So we have to look outside of our buildings. How are we getting to these buildings? Can we encourage development near transportation hubs to reduce the carbon of the lifestyle? Okay, so those are the principles. And then Green Newton cultivated alliances. So Green Newton worked with some Newton housing advocates. They worked with our studio. So this picture is the Auburndale Builders office, and on the left side is the Studio for High Performance Design and Construction. And we hosted the Newton City Councilors in our classroom, and we showed them what Passive House is, and we showed them how it works. And they were like, this is great, because seeing is believing. It's not theoretical. We bring them in, we show them the utility bills, and we show them the data that these buildings use less energy and how they work. And so the city councilors were like, great, like, we understand this makes sense. because the city councilors didn't want to be at a risk of voting for something or advocating for something and then having backlash that it's not going to work, right? So politicians want to be successful, and we wanted to position them in a place to like have good results. So, and then Green Newton did a lot of work with Newton planning and environment staff, and then did passive house and green trainings for the counselors and the planners. So like if Wellesley was evaluating, I know, building with Bill Maclay, and like educating the community about what these buildings do and how they work is a huge part in like building support so that the politicians and the counselors can then support them. So this is a big development in Newton. So I grew up in Auburndale. Riverside is the train station in Auburndale. And Mark Development was looking at a huge development there right next to the train station. It was 10 buildings, 524 housing units with retail and an office and a hotel. And at the first meeting with Green Newton, so Dan would go and meet with the developers, and Green Newton said they would support Mark Development if they committed to the 4 principles. And Mark Development engaged New Ecology, which is another firm that works like Stephanie's firm. They can evaluate the use of those principles. So like if you're considering one of these buildings, you can hire ZED, and you can hire people to evaluate these principles and how does it apply. Mark Development started taking training. So the developer was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what would this involve? And so Green Newton sort of like struck up some conversations. And in 2019, Mark Development committed to making 5 out of 6 of their residential buildings will be passive house. So like no code changes, no local zoning ordinance changes. It was basically like, and so they agreed to heat pumps for all 10 buildings, and they agreed to do low embodied carbon analysis. And for this, Green Newton gave favorable testimony at city council hearings, and people said, hey, these developers, like, we can back these developers. They're actually going to build an environmentally less damaging building. And the city council, I believe the city council has approved this. I think this is like a 10-year construction project. So this is going to be going on for a long time. Right Size Newton was not happy. They were saying they were trying to block it. I believe this is all, this is all being in the permitting process and going forward. So in like a really small amount of time, Dan and Green Newton were able to like bring together a lot of people and advocate for much better buildings that will be here for a very long time. So another development, Northland Development, this is one over by Marshall's Plaza on Needham Street, 14 buildings, 800 apartments, 8 multifamily office commercial. The first meeting, same thing. Green Newton will support and back these developments which need community support to get through the permitting process and get through city council if Northland would follow the guidelines. And so Northland hired Steve Winters Associates to do an evaluation of the principles, like what would that mean for our buildings? And then they started going to subsidized trainings. Green Newton kept up the interactions. And in 2019, Northland committed to passive house for 3 of their 8 residential buildings, and then they're studying 5 other ones. The passive house principles will be used in all 14 buildings, heat pumps for all the buildings, low embodied carbon analysis, and they agreed to have shuttles 10 minutes to the nearest T-stop. And for doing these things, Green Newton would give the community support and testify and say, hey, we're behind you. This is a good development. This is a better development than we're going to get if we just go with some developer who doesn't care about any of these things. And so again, Right Size Newton pushed back, said they'd organize a referendum to block it. I believe that one is also going into construction now. It'll be a long build. So Newton zoning regulations, Green Newton was meeting with city councilors and planning staff that was doing education. There was some language talked about for zoning ordinances. So Green Newton is advocating to change the zoning, but all this work was done without changing any zoning ordinances. Okay, so this was really, and I know Wellesley might look at some ordinances. A lot of towns are looking at a lot of different ordinances to sort of require this on big buildings or new homes. And I think, and it's going to be interesting to watch. And I know Lexington has one now. They're looking at saying you can only build half as much unless you build like a net zero style house. And I know Newton's looking at that same ordinance. I know Newton already allows for insulation, like Stephanie showed to go into the setbacks. So there's a lot of little things that can be done with zoning ordinances locally. And I think Newton's a good example of getting things done with zoning and with community activism. Okay, so some lessons learned. Environmentalists have power, right? Developers were open to the Green Newton principles, And developers with some familiarity, but they needed to be educated. They weren't that familiar with it. And so once they learned about it, the Green Newton principles really resonated with the developers, architects, and consultants. And the developers continued to support positions against like the not in my backyard attitude. One of the things that I think is interesting about the developers' reaction, because I know some of these developers, and because I live in Newton, I grew up here, is that like the green community is willing to help these people do this and give advice on how to do it. And there's a lot of good consultants, but well, I'll come back to this, but basically, yeah, the Committee for Green Building and the city's planning made it credible. So like if Sustainable Wellesley wants to really advocate, you could have like a whole consortium of people that are going to work together to approve this. You need to have like not just the local group, you need people in the town who are going to be on board. And then you need to pull in other credible people like who actually do this work on a daily basis, can say that it works. So people understand this isn't theoretical. This is all being done. This is all meets the market values that developers already have. There's a lot of mass save incentives out now that we're helping with these. And Dan's saying he really had to communicate. He kept the line open with these developers. He kept a very positive, he kept a lot of in-person meetings. He'd hear their questions, and then he'd report back and say, hey, they have these questions. Who should they talk to? And Stephanie and I would talk at Passive House meetings like, hey, who can these guys talk to? And we really, the Passive House mass community can put the people in touch with the resources they need to make these decisions. You don't have to locally as your homeowner to be an expert. There's a lot of people who are active practitioners who are happy to do this advocacy work as part of their climate activism. Some other lessons learned: the developers were fulfilled by constructing green cutting edge buildings because they saw they were future proofing their product. If it's going to take them 10 years to build 800 units, they don't want to be putting a product on the market 10 years from now that's, somebody, the next door developers got Passive House units with great air quality, better thermal comfort, lower energy bills, all these things that high performance and Passive House can deliver. So they thought, you know what, this is only going to cost us, let's say 2% more, right? But we're going to get a premium for a product, and we're going to have a top level product. And so, the developers, they just needed to learn a little bit and get comfortable with it. And then it didn't impact their market level at all, right? What impacts their market level is getting the permit to build all those buildings. So it was a pretty easy sell once they learned that at scale, it wasn't going to cost them much. And then Right Size Newton, initially, the people advocating against all these developments, it sort of unintentionally created a platform. There was so much noise about, well, what is the right size, that Green Newton had an opportunity to really step in and advocate a lot of people at community meetings about what these buildings can be and why it's not a bad thing to have low energy buildings. So if you're going to appeal to developers locally, stronger building policies are inevitable. They're already happening. The Mass Code is already moving towards net zero. Green Newton will be an ally, Sustainable Wellesley, Passive House Massachusetts, Nessie. There's a lot of organizations that we can give you allies and resources. You don't need to do this on your own. And Passive House is a better way to build. So it's not a hard sell once you get people on board. Developers want to make money. These products will sell. People want this product just like they want Teslas and they want electric vehicles. They want all electric homes, and it's the wave of the future. It's the way for the developers to stay ahead of the curve, and they get recognition and credibility because now they're viewed as like building a better product, and developers are competing just like every other business to market their product. And the mass saves continue to get better for these things. Green Newton appealed to the Newton government about climate change impact on young people. They are still working on this. The green building standards, that Newton's advocating for this, just like you guys are. Newton should be an environmental leader, and Wellesley can be an environmental leader. We have the money. These are wealthy communities with the resources and the intelligent people in the community that we just have to get out there and advocate for. And climate change is a voting issue. So voting for buildings, you can vote for better buildings. You can vote for climate change in advocating for better buildings. Like every school built should be a passive school. There's no reason why it shouldn't happen at this point. Okay, so let's speed the transition to Passive House. I left Dan's contact on here because he created all these slides. I just added my name. If you have questions, you can email me, or you can check out Studio for High Performance Design and Construction. That's our nonprofit. It's studiohpdc.org, and we host community events on a regular basis to educate people. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nick. Before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to introduce Mary Gard, who's on Sustainable Wellesley with, she's one of the team members, and she can offer some insight to some local things that are happening here in Wellesley. Mary, I'm going to unmute you. And then.
Great. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't have slides or anything. I just, I'm so impressed with the presentations today, and I don't have written comments, but I do want to point out that the state is racing to catch up with the towns on this issue. So there are some state bills that are targeting gas infrastructure and all kinds of bills. But locally here in Wellesley, we have Article 38, which the planning board has introduced to town meeting. And so it's going to be voted on at the end of March. So if any of you are on town meeting, this will come up. It is a request for basically allowing planning to put into their project of significant impact reviews or their design review board reviews. It will be allowing them to talk about carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. So it's much weaker than a lot of the towns around us that are actually doing what Newton's doing, or some towns like Arlington, Lexington, Belmont, and actually Newton today voted, at least their subcommittee voted to ban gas infrastructure for new construction. There's about 5 or 6 towns now that have done that. But this Article 38 coming before town meeting is simply allowing planning to put it into their review process for these big projects, so that in the way that they are now allowed to discuss rainwater runoff or electricity consumption in projects of significant impact, they're allowed now to discuss that with proponents of big projects, because they want to see how it will impact our town's infrastructure. So this Article 38 would allow them to bring that greenhouse gas emissions into that discussion. So that's coming up at town meeting. And so I just want to give a heads up. So this is our version of what Newton's done. We have gone to individual projects that have come up to say, hey, what about greenhouse gases? And I think we've had some success, but I think this is a little less labor intensive for the volunteers because it makes the town part of the process. So I'm giving a thumbs up to Article 38 if any of you are out there and they're able to vote on this town article. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And if you're a Wellesley resident, you can tell your town meeting member that you want them to vote in favor. So Sustainable Wellesley is grateful to have been able to bring this to you with the Climate Action Committee, and Mary Beth Martello, who is the director. Dr. Martello, you're on. I'm going to unmute you. Hold on. There's too many cooks in the kitchen trying to unmute you.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
You're on.
Thank you. Phyllis, thank you so much. Thanks to Sustainable Wellesley for putting together this fantastic program, and thanks to the speakers. And I am the town sustainability director. So I work to support the Climate Action Committee, and the Climate Action Committee I was not here at the beginning of the webinar. This might have been discussed, but the Climate Action Committee just published a climate action plan, a townwide climate action plan, and that's on our website. And it's a really fantastic roadmap for addressing climate change via mitigating greenhouse gases and building resilience to climate impacts. And buildings are a really big part of the climate action plan, and the kinds of ideas that you heard about tonight are really central to the climate action plan and what we need to be doing in our residential, commercial and institutional and municipal sectors. And the town is very much in the business of leading by example and also supporting our community. And one of the ways that the town, especially through the municipal light plant, is supporting the community is through some incentive programs. So I wanted to just highlight some things for your home, some incentive programs that might interest you for your home that are related to the kinds of technologies and practices that this webinar addressed. And so, for example, our own municipal light plan offers, there's a website you can go to do an online home energy assessment. There's also been a fantastic program in the works called Clean Comfort, and that offers up to $2,000 rebate for the installation of heat pumps. That rebate is now being re-examined in the light of some mass save rebates that are now available, which I will tell you about. But one of the additional aspects of that Clean Comfort program is that we've partnered with Abode, and Abode is a non-biased source of expert advice for residents who are navigating the heat pump purchasing process and trying to understand the sizing of heat pumps for their home and how to weigh different quotes that they're getting from vendors. And so Abode is, it's available to all residents who are interested in exploring the heat pump option. In addition, the MLP offers energy efficient appliance rebates up to 2 per calendar year. All of these things I'm mentioning are on the MLP website. Also, for national grid customers in Wellesley, Mass Save offers no costs energy assessments for your home. And something fairly new is up to $15,000 for integrated system controls, partial and whole house air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, and air to water heat pumps. And there's different price incentives associated with each of those. I think the air source heat pumps are at $10,000, up to a $10,000 rebate, the ground source up to a $15,000 rebate. So those are really hefty rebates. In addition, what you can find on the Mass Save website is rebates for electric appliances and other products that can help you be more sustainable. I also, if you want to park an EV in front of your newly sustainable home, Wellesley also has, through the municipal light plant, a Wellesley Drives Electric program. And so you can tap into expert advice through Energy New England at, if you check out our Wellesley Drives Electric portion of the MLP website. We also have a Bring Your Own Charger program where you can save $8 a month if you charge in off-peak hours, and that can add to the money you're already saving on maintenance costs and gas as you're driving your electric vehicle. And also the voluntary demand response is something that has already attracted 5,000 participants across town, and that's from the municipal light plant. That is a program to decrease our highest peak energy use during the summer months when energy use is at its highest, electricity use is at its highest. And by all working together to reduce energy use during those high peak hours, we're saving greenhouse gas emissions, and we save money, because that high peak energy electricity use is the dirtiest and the most costly. And finally, the MLP also offers an energy hotline number that you can find on their website, and that is a number you can call to talk about energy efficiency, energy audits, and things like that. So I just wanted to make people aware of some of the resources that we have, and as we continue to implement the climate action plan, we're going to have more such resources available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I put links in the chat of some of those things. The MLP has so many, and also Sustainable Wellesley has like a things you can do, and in that there are links, so you should be able to find many of those things. But I'd like to open up to some questions. We have very like a good 20 minutes. So I'm going to start with, I guess for our 3 guest speakers, we talked about windows. Is there anything about doors you want to mention, or garages, any outside, level 2 chargers?
I'm not sure where to go with that.
Okay, we can go on to the next one.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think, like, yes, if you have the capacity, install it, and the EPA is pretty helpful in like evaluating and I think they have like a certification program for the level 2 chargers. So they're a great fit for a garage, and check out the info on the EPA site if you're looking to compare or learn more about the ones that usually qualify for some incentives, but have been evaluated by the EPA.
One thing on the windows and doors. So a lot of people think, oh, I'll change on my windows, and that's like, that'll be a big thing. And one thing people don't realize, so if you look at Stephanie's slide on like how much energy usage is used in your home just from air leakage, you have to look at the house as a system, and like starting with the window or the door is just one component of the whole system of the envelope. And so that's not usually the best place to start. It's one place to look at, but you really want to look at it as a whole. So getting a blower door test and finding out what is the air leakage of the house is a good way to think about, like, okay, now what are my options? So if you're thinking about remodeling, hire somebody like a HERS rater or somebody that can do a blower door test and tell you just how much air is your house leaking.
Great. Someone's asking, when do you think they maybe estimate when you think forced hot water heat pumps, heating systems will be available?
Mitsubishi has some new products that are air to water. I haven't used them yet. And LG has air to water. So they're basically, it's a heat pump, takes the heat out of the air, puts it into a product. We're just evaluating them now. So they are becoming more and more popular, but we have not installed them yet. So I don't know, Stephanie, Rachel.
Can I say something about that? We've done it once, and one thing to think about is that it's not a source for cooling. So you'd end up with two systems. And so I don't think it's a cost-effective solution. I mean, maybe if you're in a slightly, not in our climate, but if you're in a climate that needs cooling, I think you're better off with air source. But we have done it once. We did an air to water system in order to retain radiant heating in a kitchen. So it was a niche solution, but I don't anticipate that we'll be doing it again soon, unless it's to retain radiant.
Okay, thank you. Next question, someone is looking to renovate their attic and add a bath, and right now the only floor of the attic is insulated. They were wondering about mini splits for heating and cooling, which obviously we all are in favor of, but where would be best location for them in a pitched roof? Can you answer that without seeing it?
If you're well, kind of. If you're going to, an attic is frequently the location for an air handler for a ducted air source heat pump to serve second floor bedrooms, or in this case, perhaps to serve a future finished third floor. But you're going to want to relocate the thermal and air barrier to the underside of the roof from the attic floor. So you're going to want to insulate put the insulation at the roof line. And I think I showed a couple of projects like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that was fully answering the question. But.
Yeah, I think it does. I think the other consideration is is the wall mounted unit an option, because then you can do the ductless unit and not have to change the insulation location. We've found that it usually more so in new construction than in renovations. If we have an area with a higher ceiling height, we can drop it to install the indoor unit in like a drop ceiling. But if you're working with 8-foot ceiling heights already, it's not really a good fit. So if you do have a more generous like 9-foot, you can actually just drop the ceiling height a foot and keep the unit inside that thermal enclosure that Rachel was talking about.
think it's a really good point.
Yeah,
Although
this
9-foot ceilings, I think, are rare on second floors, existing homes.
Depends when the home was built.
That's true.
This one's above my pay grade, so I'm just going to read it. When replacing interior finishes, was continuous insulation considered inboard of the studs? This might be the one place to use poly something something.
Polyiso?
Yeah.
Oh, are you reading the? So was that a question? That must have been a question for me.
Perhaps, yeah.
So what I think that was the project I showed where I said we had gutted the space and then we insulated the walls with spray foam. And this is a good opportunity to return to a point that Stephanie raised and then Nick returned to a lot in highlighting Green Newton's four principles, which is using low embodied carbon or carbon storing materials. So if we were to do that again now, we would not be using spray foam. We have committed to minimizing our use of spray foam, which is a high emitting material, one of the highest emitting materials wherever we can, and that includes in above grade walls, as well as under roofs if we can avoid it. Sometimes we can't in renovation work avoid it there. And we often can't avoid it in basements where we're insulating rubble foundations, but I would not take that approach again. I'm not sure if that's what that question was driving at, but our thoughts about this is just, and that was only 2019. So, you know, we're constantly learning and pushing ourselves to do better. And I really do, I wonder if, Nick and Stephanie have thoughts about this. It feels to me like it's in the last 5 years that our community has really gotten serious about low embodied carbon. I don't know if that aligns with how you think about it as well. I mean, when did you stop using foam? Maybe you haven't been using it for longer, Stephanie.
You know, I think that the times when we do use it is typically in renovation work, where you get into those, you know, tricky situations and you don't have control over the entire assembly. I think that, you know, the spray foam is still petroleum based, but there are better choices now in terms of like the global warming potential of the blowing agents than there was 5+ years ago, when, you know, there wasn't a good choice. And so that I think that helps. But to come back to, you know, this sort of interior insulation approach, in our renovation work, we have done, we've built out double stud walls in more generously sized homes where we had the flexibility to do that, and filled them with cellulose, which is great from a global warming perspective. And we've used rigid mineral wool on the inside of our projects in masonry renovations, as well as wood frame construction, to get that kind of continuous insulation on the inside when we have the flexibility to do that. So we haven't used polyiso inside, but we do sometimes use it outside, which was the product that you saw installed on actually both projects that I presented.
I think this is maybe the next question maybe was from one of the houses you presented, Stephanie. It says, how do you attach siding without piercing the insulation layer?
That's a good question. Actually, Nick, do you want to answer that one?
Magic. No, it's you have to hang the siding on something. So, you know, if Stephanie, what you saw in her photos was this, you know, you saw vertical wood coming down the outside of the building. We call that strapping. We typically screw that strapping, you know, back through the insulation straight back into the studs. So we're kind of like anchored. And so, yeah, you try to minimize it, but you do have to pierce the insulation to hang the siding.
And the nice thing about that strapping that Nick was talking about is that it creates what's called a rain screen for the siding. And so that allows air to get behind the siding, which is going to really improve its lifespan and also improve the lifespan of the finish. So if you've seen like, paint peeling off of wood siding before, it's usually because there's like a moisture problem. There's nothing wrong with the painter. And so getting that back ventilation is also really helpful just for maintaining the finish, in addition to the logistics of fastening your siding.
Next question is, I'm wondering about where in bedrooms and living area to put fan coils and the ERV supplies. We insulated and wrapped our ranch. We ditched the propane stove for induction. Now we really have an indoor pollution problem. We need ventilation and want to ditch the boiler. Thinking hard about air to water mono block heat pumps, supply heat for spaces, hot water, as well as chilling. Discuss.
You want to take
So
that one,
there's
Rachel?
A lot there. So this is a ranch style house.
Yes.
I missed some of that, but I'm just wondering if the ERV could go in the attic, if there's an attic space, that would, be my first thought. But you asked me on the last question if I would need I would need to see it to answer it. This may be one of those, but I think just to zoom out, the indoor air pollution problem it points to just it brings us back to the points that Stephanie was making a lot in her presentation about the importance of thinking about providing continuous balanced ventilation, and it becomes even more important the tighter your house gets. I mean, not to say, we often think, oh, if a house is leaky, the indoor air quality is fine, which isn't really true, because you don't have control over where the air comes through. It's just like leaking through all the holes. A lot of those holes are in the basement, which is, where your furnace or your boiler is, and it's kind of musty and damp, and that air is all, traveling through your house. So leaky houses are not necessarily, don't necessarily have the best air quality either, but it does become really more important as you tighten, as you reduce, you get those really low air exchange, ACH numbers that Stephanie and Nick are hitting on their new construction projects, which we don't typically get to in renovation and retrofits unless we're doing a super insulated deep energy retrofit. But yeah, so you got to think about that. And find a location for it. I don't remember the rest of what was in there, but there was a lot. So maybe
That was most
there are
of
other
it.
questions.
Rachel, have you guys done any of the like through wall ERVs, like the Luno systems in your projects?
We've done, I think we've done them once or twice. I think my sense, we haven't done any of them recently. My sense is that people don't like the way that they sort of switch there's sort of the sound bothers people of those systems. Yes. What we often do, we're doing more and more, is we try not to let the best be the enemy, or perfection be the enemy of good enough, is to focus on getting ventilation into bedrooms. So focusing, if we're really tightening up a house, to focus on getting an ERV into the bedrooms and exhausting from the bathrooms, and call it a day, and not try to get to the entire house. I don't know what Nick and Stephanie think about that, if they're like, oh, shame, cover your, but so that's kind of the moderate approach that we would take, if to try to keep things in line.
Okay, there are a couple of people asking about, we didn't touch on geothermal. Who wants to discuss geothermal?
Do either of you all install ground source?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I'll say we rarely work on projects with ground source heat pumps. We find that they are a better fit for a higher load home or building than we typically design. And so if we were working on like much larger homes or like lesser performing homes that had higher heating and cooling demands, they might be maybe more common, but because we're shrinking down the heating and cooling loads so much, the upfront investment and the equipment associated with them isn't really a great fit. And the air source heat pumps have been a really like great go-to for the vast majority of our projects. So that's sort of our perspective. I think that we've probably worked on 2 projects in the past 15 to 17 years that had ground source heat pumps, and one was for an engineer who designs them for much larger buildings. So a little bit of a skewed sample.
I know our high school has it, but I'm
Yeah,
sure
exactly, and that's like a larger building, larger demand for for heating and cooling. How about you, Rachel?
No, I mean, even though we're not getting the loads really low like you are, it's hard to justify the upfront the costs of those systems and in our projects. So I don't know, Nick, have you ever used them?
No, I mean, I know they use them at the big schools like the MLK school in Cambridge,
Right.
they put like hundreds of wells. But what typically people ask is there's a misconception about heat pumps that they're not efficient in cold weather, and that's an outdated concept. So we tell people is
Right.
the new heat pumps, the Mitsubishi like MXZ series, the Hyperheats, then a lot of these new units are 85% efficient to minus 13 degrees. So like we can get a lot of energy out of the air, even at minus 13. And so unless you're drilling a well and like you're gonna have a well, a drilling rig and all that stuff, and then you're gonna pump the glycol down and pump it back up and all of that, that's a lot of energy that like in a lot of cost that like, doesn't factor in because the heat pumps are so efficient. So it can work.
Simpler is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, simpler is better, right?
Yeah,
At the scale of a school, yeah, maybe, but at the scale of a single family or a small multifamily, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, you pointed out that I think the heat pumps of, a couple of years ago, generations ago, were not as efficient. Now they're like really smart technology. So I think that's also something we need to educate, is that if the Nordics can do it,
Climate heat
can do
pumps.
it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Cold climate heat pumps. Cold climate heat pumps.
Yep.
That's the technical term.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we see too is that in the major renovations and the new construction where we're doing that, overhaul of the building enclosure, making it super airtight, super insulated, it retains heat so well. And so, even when there are power outages, the temperature like slowly coasts down over time because they, 1, retain heat really well, 2, they heat up during the day. If the sun comes out, and just the kind of the daily activities from people inside can help to keep them warm. I think we had a client from maybe 10 years ago before the hyperheats were available, and there was something, I think a rodent like chewed through something outside, and her heat pump went out in a cold snap for like a couple days before she had realized that it wasn't working. And so and that kind of ties into like resilience, right? Like these homes are keeping people warm and safe with no technology at all. And that's what we love about the air sealing and the insulation, is that there's nothing mechanical, there's nothing to fail, there's nothing that even needs power, when that's the workhorse of the heating and cooling system, when you can prioritize the enclosure.
Well, it's just about 8:30, and we want to be mindful of people's time and really, really thank Rachel, Nick, Stephanie. You are so insightful and we're so grateful you made time tonight. Some folks have asked, this is being recorded, and if you signed up for this event, we will send you the copy of the recording. And if you have any questions, you can obviously email info@sustainablewellesley and we can point you to Nick, Stephanie, and Rachel. But we thank you all. Have a lovely evening and be well. Good night. Thank you.